Here, you'll know a lot about me, so don't worry.
All right, thanks, Susanne, very much. Stay here.
Okay, well, I'm gonna turn this on. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, you can hear better.
Can't hear you.
You cannot hear me.
Yes, it's on.
Okay.
It's on.
Is there a volume? Is there a louder thing?
It's up there. We want it.
Okay, it's okay. Well, I'll try to speak loud enough so everyone can hear, I hope. And again, I'm Susanne Lee. I'm a faculty fellow, and I'm at the University of Maine, Orono, but I work at the Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions, which is a research center on campus. So I originally taught at the business school, but I could see that the interest for the students and myself was really in the area of sustainable business. And so I started working on some projects with the Mitchell Center and eventually transferred over fully. So now I work on research projects with students as student interns. So I don't actually have to teach classes anymore, which I'm very happy to not do that, but I still get to work with students and I get to come out and do presentations like this. And so I am very grateful. Particularly Janine was the one who, kept up with everyone's schedules and trying to really make this happen. So thank you, Janine. I guess, let's see. The presentation today, it's really going to be very informal. So at any point that you have questions or you want more information, feel free to, raise your hand or stop me, but I'm happy to do that. And, this was my first, I've actually changed the presentation. It's going to, my usual work for the last 5 years at the Mitchell Center. My team has been focused on food waste. The Mitchell Center, for those, probably nobody knows really what we do there, but our research center is working on sustainability solutions. All of our research, unlike maybe other academic research you've heard of before, is all stakeholder driven. So we don't sit around at the university and think about what do we think would be interesting to work on. We work on the problems that have been brought to us by the state. And so particularly food waste, so materials, I'm on the materials management team, and the biggest issue within all the materials management streams is actually food waste because, it causes so many problems economically, socially, and environmentally, but there are also real benefits if we did manage it properly. But it does make up the largest part of the solid waste stream. So it's over 30%. The most, if you went to the landfill and you sorted through all the stuff that was thrown out as trash, you would actually find food more than any other single component. So anyway, so it's a big problem. So 5 years ago, my team took this on, and the approach that we used, because we are stakeholder driven, was to put together a working group of, it's really a food system problem, food waste. And it's, you have a system of food production that instead of it's a linear system. So you make it, you use it, and then you just throw out the rest. It's supposed to be really a circular food system. So you produce it, you use it, and then whatever doesn't get used gets recycled into compost so that you can then, generate more food. And in that way, it would be good. So we engaged all the people who were part of the food system. We had a series of working groups out of which they recommended ideas for what we call them the big six. So 6 solutions for food waste. So that's really the presentation today. And the sustainable part of our solutions is that the solutions have to be economically viable, they have to be socially beneficial, and definitely for the long-term future, environmentally sound. And so for today's presentation, this is for the first time ever, I've added a moral component. There's a real faith-based foundation to why we should also and benefit to doing this work, which, I go to the Catholic Church, so I sometimes think about it when I listen to the homily, but I had never really put the two together. So you can tell me today, you're like my first audience for this, version of the presentation. But so that's the work, stakeholder driven. It's got to benefit the community. It's transdisciplinary. So on my team, I have faculty members helping us out from across the university, people in food science, people of soil, climate health, whoever we need for the solutions. And all of our work is with students. So, and very often the students are leading the work. So when you see some of our projects, you'll see that, which I think is also very heartening for the work that we do. So anyway, I think that's all the background, and I'll get into this now if I can forward. So well, anyway, you could see food waste. It is everyone's problem. That's why I enjoy going out and talking about it, because the more people that we can reach with the message. And today, this Faith Fights Food Waste is sort of the new element that I added. But the food waste problem, for those who don't know these numbers as well as I do, 1/3 of the food, actually could be up to 40% of the food that we produce in the United States and in the world is actually never eaten. So we make all this food and then nearly half. And we use the analogy often, if you went to the grocery store and you bought 3 bags of groceries and you dropped one of them in the parking lot on the way to the car, you would be concerned about that, right? That would be a problem if you dropped 1/3 of your groceries. But we just do that every day and we don't seem to be concerned. So, that is really the problem. It's 133 billion pounds of food wasted annually in the United States, worth more than $160 billion. And that, the part that people, so maybe some people have heard that statistic, but what is not often thought about is that it's not just the cost of the food that you've dropped in the parking lot that you're wasting, but it's all the resources, the valuable resources that went into that food. So I think it's something like over 20% of our fresh water is used to produce food that we just end up throwing away. So imagine the labor, the energy, the land, all these resources that could be put to other more beneficial uses if we weren't using them to actually produce food that we in the end throw away. And then something that I think in Maine we're much more, because we're really mindful about our town budgets, but it still doesn't change our behavior. The third part of that cost is actually the disposal cost, right? So we have to, when we throw all that food away, we actually then pay people to take it and come and pick it up and then process it, which is an unnecessary expense if we just bought and ate and used the right amount. And in the past, in the culture here in Maine, there is a tradition. We were at the end of the food supply chain, right? Way up in Maine. So, food didn't always make it up here. So we had to be much better at using everything we had. But somehow, because of advances, now we can get food in the wintertime from Chile. We can get it from everywhere. So we're not so careful about how we manage our food. So this is a real problem. But so, yes.
Excuse me. I'm looking at that figure, the 1/3.
Yes.
Food is generated in households and in restaurants and in inns. Do we know how that breakdown works?
This is a very excellent question, and I didn't even invite you purposely to this. Actually, in 2024, just in April, the state did a real breakthrough study, which is what's called the Maine Food Loss and Waste Generation Study, which actually you can go online, and I have a list of resources, a little sheet that you can go. Anyway, it's online. Maine DEP produced it, but the Mitchell Center, I actually helped to work on it. So our team, and it looks at the total amount of food wasted in our state, 360,000 tons annually. And then it breaks it down by 15 sectors of generation, including residential, including hospitality, hotels, every sector that does produce waste. It also talks about the difference between unintended waste. So there's some waste that is just a part of the food processing that ends up as waste. Then there's good edible food, which is the real crime, because the majority actually of that food waste is still good and edible. But it breaks it down by county, so you could see which of the counties. And there was Aroostook County sort of was notable in the study as having a lot of, but it's food loss and waste generation. So it's not always just waste, but it's also loss. So in the making of food, there is some loss, and agriculture has a lot of that. So you grow maybe 100 acres of broccoli, but you really, for whatever reason, only 80 of them get picked, and that's really what you needed. So 20 acres sit there. Okay, so it's food loss, and it would have been counted in the study, but it doesn't end up in the landfill. Nothing bad. I mean, they then plow it under. And I've just been working on a project in Aroostook County, so that's why I can tell you this. We are talking, though, about in a place where there is hunger, 16% of the population still suffers from hunger. So, okay, it's not as bad as putting it in the landfill, but probably we should be figuring out how to actually get, those extra 20 acres to be picked and to be fed to people, because that is what's needed. So So the question's really good. I can't tell you, the data is all there. So you could see by sector, by county in our state, all those details.
Susanne, just a comment. We've made some copies of the handouts that she references, so you can get one.
Yeah, you could definitely get that afterwards. And but yes, residential is also a huge, actually residential food waste accounts for the majority of food waste. I mean, a lot of people like to think it's not really my problem. Let those restaurants, let the grocery stores worry about it. But actually the sector that does create the highest levels is actually residential, so household. So that's why, again, coming out and talking to groups like this is important because it's everyone's problem and we can all do something about it. You know, we didn't used to have this problem because we all used to do something about it. You know, we would can and we would dehydrate and we would, you know, not buy things that we weren't going to use. So it's just a bunch of practices that we started following that have led us to this now a big problem again. So the problem is, like I said, it wastes all these resources. It also, you know, that disposal, it's, you know, whether you're here in Portland and it's going to Maine and it's waste to energy. Okay, well, food doesn't belong in a waste to energy. If you put food into your fireplace and set it, you know, on fire, like you would see that wet, heavy stuff isn't really meant to be burned. So now they have to put more natural gas and it really just makes a big bad. And the same thing with landfills. Landfills were not designed for food to go in them. Nobody ever imagined that the trash, the biggest part of your trash would be food. So these are like, you know, dry storage for waste. So now you have the problem of methane gas being produced because food shouldn't be trapped in a landfill. Also leachate that threatens the water supply. So, you know, but all of this problem is sort of manufactured by us. So, you know, 97% of this waste of food does end up in landfills across the country where it produces this methane gas. And I'll go more into that and some of the things that are better that we're working on. But anyway, we throw away here in Maine about 40% of our food. Like I said, it's the largest part of the waste stream. And at the same time, Maine, I think we now go back and forth, but we were the leader in food insecurity in New England, you know, with 1 in 10 adults and 1 in 7 children going hungry. Numbers fluctuate. I mean, it's been as high as 1 in 5 children, you know, going hungry in our state, while, like I said to you, we're throwing all this good edible food away. I mean, I work with somebody up in the county and he told me he worked in Africa for 6 years and he worked and lived there and he lived with a family and they would eat dinner at night, like out of a container of whatever they had found during the day that was edible. And he said, you know, the things it might include rodents and insects and everything. And he now is doing a food waste collection program, composting program up in the county. And he said, the stuff that comes in at the farmer's market when people bring their compost bins, he said, oh my God, my family in Africa would have been overjoyed to have that for their dinner that night. You know, he said like a half a ham, you know, all real food. So that is really the problem. So almost all the food waste ends up in landfills, so it's wastes money, it harms the environment, and it takes nutrients away from, you know, feeding people. So this is my new part, food waste. Oh, but now I don't really have it. Where are my comments? Okay, well, we lost the presenter view, I guess. So I'll have to try to remember it. But basic, I'm sorry?
Do you want the sidebar?
It showed my little, for me, it had the presenter view and it had like my notes and I had my notes written into the bottom of it. But basically, okay, I can tell you whether we're talking about Buddhism or Christianity or what else do I have? Hinduism, Judaism, Muslim traditions, secular, or Unitarian, because I did put this together. Now I had them all quoted and cited in terms of from all those different faiths, the basis for why wasting food is really a big problem. But it boils down to, actually, this is the part that I like for something like this, an interfaith discussion, is that it all boils down in all of those faith-based traditions to we're supposed to care about each other and keeping each other fed. I mean, and from the different sightings from whether it's the Bible or the Quran, it's, you know, you grow what you need to eat and whatever is extra is for you to share with others. That was consistent throughout all of the teachings. So that is really one thing that we have seemed to forget. I mean, so simple as, right, you bake something, it's way too much. Your family doesn't need the whole sheet of brownies. You could easily, take that other section and bring it to the homeless shelter, or bring it to, another congregate living facility, or honestly, even your neighbor down the street who probably isn't baking anymore and would be delighted. But this thought of like getting what you have for yourself, but anything extra is meant to, you are fortunate enough to have that so that you can then share that with others. And it's an empowering thing, right? It helps you be grateful. It makes you acknowledge and be grateful about the fact that you have enough that you can share with others. And the act of sharing, really has so many benefits for you as well as your community. And to live in that kind of a community is really a blessing also. So there's, even though I can see my notes, that's even something like that. And the other part of it, which I think speaks to your creation, this earth stewardship sort of idea, but again, it's consistent through all of those, is that, we've been given and blessed with the resources of this planet, and it's our job to take care of it. And, I was thinking about it, wouldn't you do, you're given something so wonderful and so precious. It shouldn't be in anybody's sort of practice to then waste it or destroy it or, abuse it in any way. And so again, all these religious traditions sort of speak to that same thing. So they're really two important moral imperatives to why, wasting food, throwing it away, putting it in the trash is really not something. And, I do a lot of work in the school systems, particularly with kindergarten, the elementary schools. And it's so fundamental, this idea that it doesn't take more than 10 or 15 minutes of talking to, whether it's the kindergarten class, because we have to do them all when we do our assemblies there, kindergarten through 5th grade. They all get it in 10 or 15 minutes, the idea of throwing food away. And it becomes so ingrained that we've had kids who then go to their classrooms where they don't have the compost bin, and they're like, really, they bug their teacher until there's some receptacle there, because they've now heard, like, it's been connected for them that food doesn't belong in the trash anymore. So they really don't want that to happen. So it's an important, it's a very basic moral issue also. But talking about the economic problem, and this is based on the food waste generation study that I mentioned, here in Maine, 360,000 tons of food annually worth about 1.8 billion. I mean, they calculate the retail value of a pound of food at $2.50. So using that, it could be 1.8 billion in retail of food that we waste, or $100 a ton if it's, food scraps that goes to compost. So somewhere between 36 million, but it's a lot of waste. And then one thing that we were just looking at a study recently, that their biggest concerns today are in the food area are high food prices. And the second one is having enough food for their families, right? So those would seem very sensible. But what people don't seem to understand, and, any thoughts after this about how to better convey this to people, is that when you start wasting food, it just makes those problems even worse, because it makes the prices for food go higher, because you're cutting down, you're wasting this supply. If there was that 40% was back, the retailers would really be, there would be more surplus, and therefore there would be, the prices wouldn't be so high. And that your own personal costs for your food, every time you throw something in the trash instead of feeding it to your family, I mean, it's really making you have to then go to the grocery store another trip. But somehow it has shown in the research right now that as much as people can't stand the high price of food, and they don't equate that to throwing 30% or 40% of their shopping trip away. So it's really that's one of the biggest challenges in this work, is to help see that we have a way to help you fight those high food prices, if you would just start to think about managing your food like you would any other resource.
I think you're addressing some things that are absolutely critical. We know it's a huge political thing right now that food prices have really skyrocketed over the last 3 years, and there are good reasons for it. But the fact is, there's a whole industry, I presume, the food producing industry,
Mhm.
which is trying to get us to keep on consuming more and more and more. If, if, if one could, say if there were a 1/3 improvement in understanding food and understanding the use of it, it would more than make up for the recent inflation. But I have a feeling that the people that are shouting about that the most would be the ones that would be the least interested
Mhm.
and who would find it politically correct, that is incorrect for them to do anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, part of my work, I work in Hannaford for, when I first moved here to Maine. So I was working in private brand for Hannaford, making, products throughout the store. And, definitely that was the goal, was to sell as much as you can and sell more every year than you did last year. So for sure, and I think you have those like buy up, stock up and save events. So, and now I'm teaching that, like, don't listen to those stock up and save things. Don't buy big bundles because it's on sale. These, I mean, so I guess, that's the whole point of education, is to try to get out, and since I also taught marketing, so I really do understand sort of that messaging that gets people to go out and buy more. And I guess all I would say is you have to resist, and you have to sort of just, it's like fraud in investing, right? I mean, people are trying to get you to do all sorts of things with your money other than the thing that you should do with your money. And if you listen to every one of those voices who had all these schemes for you to be investing your money or where you should put it, you would also end up with a big problem. So you have to become more discerning and understand that, yes, that is in the best interest of the grocery store, but it's not in my best interest.
And it also seems like, I think a goodly portion of the population is going to say, here it is, the elites are preaching to us again. And the typical family, I don't think, wants to think about this very much. And I'd like to read one other little question, the term waste. Waste is an ambiguous term. Waste on whatnot, that's something good, we can go along with that. But at the same time, waste, human waste, animal waste.
Yes.
The thought is, get rid of it, get rid of it.
Yes.
Now, so if we talk about food waste, I'm not sure that we're totally identifying with the positive side of the concept of waste. So we might be mixing it up.
Yes, yes. And we do often talk about it. It's just as a term, it's kind of like, Kleenex, it's sort of the term that people are familiar with, but it doesn't, you're right, accurately necessarily describe what it is. And that's, you're funny, because I was just, because of that research that says, people are concerned about high food prices, they're concerned about feeding their family, but number 7 on the list, all the way down at number 7, is food waste. So I was just thinking, actually, over the last 2 days, that what we should really be doing is not, I mean, that's probably our whole problem, is talking about it as food waste, because everybody says, oh, I don't really waste food. What do you mean? Oh, that's not me. So then they kind of just shut it off right there. But I guess if we could, change it up a bit. Yep.
I guess 2 related questions. First of all, it seems the American public has been brainwashed. If food products are not perfect, throw them out. And another thing, an example, I got a question a little bit quick at a food pantry. If you have a dozen eggs and one dozen is cracked, they ought not be discarded. I think that's by law. So how do we unbrainwash people? If it's gonna do something, lose that, lose the rest of it. And you would change the law, like saying, if the one broken egg, the ought not get lost. Can we make that law?
They could offer carbonation free. One broken.
Yes, yes. I'm not familiar on the specific egg issue about, what the rules are, but definitely the biggest issue that you're actually highlighting is food date labeling. So the whole issue, and again, because I worked in the grocery store and I made products, I know personally about the food date labeling, which is that, except in the category of baby and infant formula, where the date labels are actually a health related issue, other than that, and I also think that the meats would also be sort of an area that you could enter into that. But other, meats and seafood, that type of fresh stuff, the rest of it is pretty much set actually by the manufacturers themselves, the best buy, sell by, and was originally designed as an inventory management system, really between the producer and the grocery store, when it used to be like mom and pop retailers, so that they'd have some idea of what they needed to do. They then found, I almost remember this way back when, that somebody was like, oh, do you know what those codes mean? And here's what they mean. And they got consumers all excited about, hey, I can now read this labeling too. And I see that this is not supposed to be good anymore. You know, now I know that I shouldn't buy this one and I should buy the fresher dates. So then, of course, the food manufacturers are not that dumb. They're, oh, you know, well, let's start really making these consumer-facing dates, not just some code that has to be deciphered, but let's tell them if they're so interested in what's fresh and what's less fresh, let's put a date on it. But now we have the horrifying result of people who literally clean out their refrigerator and pantry by checking the dates and anything. And then we have food pantries who also, well, I don't want to make my clients feel that they are lesser. And so why should they be having food that's got dates that are out of date? So now we, the pantry, who are supposed to be trying to feed people, are also following the practice. Now, I know because I volunteered at Good Shepherd, they do have over there sorting area, they have like, okay, whatever the date is in this category, you could go for 2 more years in this category. So they do have, I think Feeding America has some definition. But anyway, the food date label makes it so confusing. And in the UK, where they've made the best advances in reducing household food waste, they have had a campaign that's something like sniff, taste, something, reminding you to use your senses, which is what we used to do. Like if it smells bad, if it looks bad, if it tastes bad, it's probably bad. And otherwise, you know, it's probably okay. And
when I was a kid, that's all we did.
yes. And actually that's pretty reliable now. And so actually Congresswoman Pingree has been a big advocate. It's bipartisan legislation where they've been trying to say, this food date labeling doesn't serve anybody really. It causes so, I think they attribute maybe over 20% of the waste can be attributed just to this confusion over the dates. Yep.
My parents used to say if I smell bad, taste bad, that, you know, I should be thrown out. So, but, I believe online, and I was trying to save it, but I forgot it. There is a grocery delivery system, a national grocery store that sells food that has been labeled in boxes or cans. They identify what the extra food is, but companies also throw those items out. They're still at this grocery store does sell all of these things, also meat that for whatever reason, not because it's bad, but it may again have been mislabeled or whatever. They do sell that online at much cheaper and they deliver.
I think my daughter got me to try that. But there is the guy who used to run Trader Joe's in Massachusetts, I think in the Boston area. I think it's called the Daily Table or something like that. But he, understanding, of course, because he was in the industry, that there is this discrepancy between the dates and what's actually good. So I think it's actually more than one store. I think there's a small chain of stores now in Massachusetts that do actually sell at reduced prices this food that falls between those windows of like, it's perfectly good, it's just after the date. I mean, when we were doing food development in a lot of categories, it was as unscientific as, okay, let's have these crackers, like, let's taste them after this, you know, like, oh, okay, 6 weeks, they weren't as good as they were when we first tasted them. So like, I guess that should be the best buy, because it is, you know, best buy, you know, the date that but they're perfectly good and edible at many other dates beyond that. So again, I mean, sort of what you're talking about, the messaging, the information we're getting is not, well, and technically it says best buy. It doesn't say you throw out after this date. So, but people have just sort of interpreted that way. So like with everything, right? Selection season, you know, you have to just be more educated and a bit discerning to really understand what this is all about. And, you know, unfortunately, because of marketing, because of that, there's a lot of, you know, ways to be informed.
The other thing I was realizing, I live in subsidized housing, and people will get monthly boxes of food. Many of the items in those boxes, whoever gets the boxes don't want them, and there are piles of canned goods. Other times there's bagged rice or even milk, but it sits there and then it suddenly disappears. And so I don't drive, so I would probably need to ask someone I could bag all of that up and bring it to the food pantry. Although I don't know if they want canned mixed vegetables.
No, all that stuff. That's exactly what should happen. I was at Wayside Food Programs and with a group of pantries that day who were all talking, and the senior boxes, I think, are the ones where, you know, and one was like, you know, a lot of them don't have dental issues and they put nuts in there, and people like, how much rice can a single person eat, you know? So they were saying exactly that. Now, okay, maybe there's some input that's necessary to the USDA to sort of get those boxes right. But anyway, that is food. It's ready to go, ready to eat. And so that's what everybody said, you know, it should find its way back to pantry or be shared. And what's funny, when I tell you about our school food waste program, there are share baskets in the cafeteria lunchrooms. And it's to start getting kids at kindergarten to 5th grade to understand, just because I don't want to eat this, it's perfectly good. And let me put it in this basket, which makes it now available for somebody who does want that milk to actually take the milk, or who wants that apple to take the apple. And so, you know, we need to really start thinking exactly like you are. And you know, people would probably appreciate, because it doesn't really, I don't know who feels good about taking food and just setting, I mean, you might not want it, but you still kind of, I think, inherently would feel better to know that it was going to some good purpose. So if you could collect it, I'm sure if you contacted the pantry, they would find a way to get it there. But, you know, that's where we all, you know, can possibly help with this effort. So
the other thing at the school, teachers at particular school where I work used to have individual refrigerators, and there's milk sent for breakfast. And any of that milk that was not drank could be kept in those teacher refrigerators. But now they are no longer allowed to have those types of electrical appliances, and the milk that is not used every morning is thrown out. Even if it hasn't been.
Is that here in Portland?
It should be able to be returned to the cafeteria staff, who could then send it out the next day, but it has to be thrown out now.
Because they're letting it stand. Yeah. So this is what our school food waste study is working to identify. Is that in Portland?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it really, there's so many not so hard ways to prevent that. And that's what our study, we did 4 elementary schools the first year. We're doing another 4. World Wildlife Fund has given us grant funding to continue the work. So I'll talk more about the food thing, but all these points that you bring up are very good, but I might as well let me just keep going through the slides. I'll go faster though, since it seems like you have a lot of comments and questions. So you know, it's an economic problem, a social problem, a moral problem. Social problem, of course, right? You throw away the food instead of getting it to feed people. You know, food as medicine. I sit on a food as medicine working group. You know, food as medicine starts with feeding people. They probably get sick when they don't get fed, but then good nutritious food. So it really is all contributing to that. It's kind of a social issue in that, you know, like we learn about in our faith-based teachings, that, you know, some have many and some have less. And, you know, when you say that on average in the world, 30% or 40% of food is wasted, it never gets eaten. Okay, but that's not in the poorer countries. That number is far less. It's the countries like ours that are wealthy that are really the ones who are the big wasters, and we just, you know, bring the averages up to where they are. So, you know, that is a social issue as well. The environmental problem, you know, and this is very timely right now here in the state of Maine, because it is an environmental problem. Project Drawdown for years has listed food waste reduction as either the #1 or in their top 3 actions that can be taken to mitigate climate change. So they have been studying the issue of food waste and the amount of methane that's generated. It didn't seem as bad as cars, But then in more recent years, they've started to look at the food system. So maybe the waste piece of it and the footprint of the waste is only this big. But if you look at the food system and all the transportation and all the methane produced, totally, okay, then it really does rank. And food waste, if food waste were a country, this is always an interesting one, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases after the US and China. So it does really amount to a lot. US food waste, it generates greenhouse gases equal to 32.6 million cars, more than the airline industry. And, food waste threatens both our air and water quality. It's not good when we have waste to energy facilities and we're burning food. And it's not good when the food goes in the landfill because of that leachate problem, where it seeps. And unfortunately, and surprisingly, I don't know why landfills in our state are sometimes adjacent to major waterways. And so it just seems like, a disaster. It is, in fact, waiting to happen. Did somebody have a question? Yes.
Ground up food waste and the garbage disposal that goes into the sewer system is probably better throwing it in a landfill.
It's not. You guys are just perfect. Like such the most enlightened group. You're like asking all these questions that are exactly on time, because we really didn't talk about that. We talk about landfills all the time because that's really what we can see. We see it going in there. We also are very visible at waste to energy. You could just take one of those visits at Maine and see, what's coming in there as trash and what's getting burnt. But this issue of down the drain, even the EPA had not, and we talked to the state of Vermont where they have this food waste ban and stuff, and this down the drain issue was kind of like nobody really talked about it, at least not in anything I was reading. But we were doing a food waste study with a business. And when we do these food waste tracking and measuring studies with an organization, we say to them, this is really worthwhile because you're paying so much for the disposal when you're throwing this food away. So we're going to help you and do this study and show you how you can compost this instead and save money in doing so. Or reduce your food waste because now you're tracking it. Well, come to see that this institution actually has a huge food grinder in their kitchen, and the stuff isn't really going into the trash. It's all going down this like wonderful. Yeah, so now, and the reason why it doesn't catch up with it is because it's now a wastewater treatment facility problem. It's not the landfill people aren't working about it, so it's a whole different set of government agency that's responsible. And also because it's wastewater and it's like plumbing costs, right? It's infrastructure. It's not the facilities person who's worried about disposal is not the person who gets called in probably on a weekly basis to fix this grinder that's gotten clogged again and again and again because of the things that they throw down these big industrial grinders. It's like horrific, meals like that, just of all consistencies. So it's definitely, and it is catching up though right now because the EPA in their latest food, because there's a food waste hierarchy, not all, methods of dealing with food scraps are equal. Composting, of course, or anaerobic digestion, the best. But it was kind of a question about down the drain. Now down the drain has been listed at the bottom. It's actually equally as bad as landfill. So it's a very timely question. And like I said, in Vermont, they have a food waste ban, but they have not done really anything about like trying to take a look at that method of disposal because it's just kind of, but in California, in new construction, they're not allowed to have garbage disposals. And then I looked it up and found out in the world, like in the EU, most countries ban garbage disposals. And it's really America where we created the garbage disposal that 50% of households still have it. So it's kind of a uniquely American problem. Yes.
About 10 years ago, Sunday River Ski Resort made people take the existing garbage disposals out and they could go on.
She was mentioning that at Sunday River, how many years ago?
Maybe 10, I don't remember.
Oh, really? So maybe, as long as maybe 10 years ago, they made them take garbage disposals out of the condos.
These are individually owned condos.
Oh, so as a legislation.
Now, if you're on the mountain, part of the resort, even if you own your own condo, you cannot have a garbage disposal. And if you had one, it's gone.
Okay, well, yeah, like I said, in the EU,
think
I mean, there is a
Maine
ban.
That's a very limited population of skiers.
Yes.
But they all have homes elsewhere. And it got people thinking a little bit.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I think that Sunday River, I've done things not directly there, but they do seem that that community, the mountain, I don't know exactly where it stems from, but they are really doing a lot of work. I think they have for their on mountain facilities, they have like an industrial sized composting type of, so they seem to be very mindful. I mean, as you do find usually with island communities, some of these areas where they really understand the dangers of the impact to the environment because it's their livelihood or it's their, island communities. I mean, they can't exist. I mean, you can imagine building up trash. You live on an island, it's a problem. So you really have to be sort of on the forefront of a lot of these practices. So that's probably why Sunday River.
At about the same time, Sunday River instituted a composting system where common people could take food waste.
Yeah.
And that is no longer with us because people threw papers in.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So she was saying that Sunday River had a composting program, but people were throwing diapers
for their resort operations.
Yes, but for the community.
The real estate.
Well, and contamination is a big problem in a lot of these communities because of the lack of education. So I always say it's really important before you even, and this has been proven time and time again, in some cases, having access to a facility or processing actually makes the problem get bigger because people feel like, oh, I now have somewhere. There's a research on recycling out in California where they gave them a recycling thing, and the recyclables, the amount of plastic and stuff went up because people were like, oh, it's fine now. I have a place to put my recycling, so it's actually okay. So you want to. But education is important. And in Portland, we really think that they were very smart. We did work with Portland on its compost and community collection sites. And what they did with the siting of putting them next to community gardens in the first go around, it's the same thing they found in Aroostook County where they do the collections at the farmer's market. There's certain areas where people are more educated about how this whole thing works. And so when you give them the access to the resource, you're not going to see diapers at the community garden or pet waste bags because they are making the link that this stuff that we're putting in the screen bin sitting here in the community garden is going to be used for compost to grow these fruits and vegetables. Probably not a good link between disposable diapers and helping to grow food. So that has really helped. And the city of Portland has been amazed at very low rates of contamination, which is super important to keeping the program viable. And that's why they've actually expanded it. Yep.
How these garbage to garden folks run on those buckets, they go to a lot of residences, but do they go to a lot of restaurants and businesses?
Oh, yeah. Yep. They have commercial customers. I know we were working with Portland Pie at one point, who also, like I said, about this education and action link, they got the service for composting, but they hadn't really done a lot of work of tracking their own food waste. They were just like, oh yeah, we probably shouldn't throw it away. So they got garbage to garden, which then made them realize they didn't really think there was much getting thrown away. But once they started having the program and sorting out the food, they were astounded to see how much food was getting collected by garbage to garden. So yeah, so definitely they have commercial customers. Yes.
I just wanted to close the loop on that, the water cycle and why it's important for septic waste. Then throwing it out, like a Sunday River, they probably don't have a treatment plant there. It probably goes to the leach field. And the biological oxygen demand, basically the stuff, the critters that need to break down that waste is pretty stressful on a treatment plant system for a septic system. And that's why the less stuff you can keep out of that waste stream, the more efficient your treatment plant will run or your septic system will run.
Yes.
That's why you don't have them in cans. It's why you don't have septic systems with disposals feeding them.
Yeah. So. No, thank you. I mean, that is a good explanation. And it also does explain because it's the wastewater treatment and it's collectively coming in and it doesn't necessarily identify who's throwing the meatloaf or who's throwing, like the pizza down the drain. So, but they do, because I have been investigating this, that in some areas where they do have like a major industry, they can put measuring devices on those facilities to see what's coming out, because the wastewater treatment facility is having a problem with this. So, but like I said, it just seems like its own separate issue and not connected to this overall problem. So it hasn't gotten the attention. But we are hoping that alone from the capital infrastructure side of, like, you have to replace your systems, your plumbing systems, because you keep clogging them up. We see a lot of facilities starting themselves to get rid of these because they just realize that it's not the way to deal with the waste. They have other problems.
Sorry, as I said, I live in a building where there, I believe, are 600 residents. But there's no way for us to do the garbage to garden, because it would mean perhaps 300 of these containers outside, and the building management, which is HUD and the state of Maine, are reluctant, for whatever their reasons are, to try to do some type of recycling for food. And so I don't know how other senior facilities handle that. I know that there are other subsidized housing apartment complexes, but I think that there would be also a great opportunity to do recycling there, except for however you're going to do it.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, talking about multifamily housing, and it's not easy for the residents, but a community collection site for that facility would be the way to do it. And these providers, AgriCycle or Garbage to Garden, they have the ability to do that. It's whether the owner of the building wants to make that available. But we are trying to promote that. I think there's a question over here.
What I hear most from people is that composting is very complicated and difficult thing to do. And this ties in educating. It seems to me that we should put more effort into simplifying, if we can simplify the process in any way, or at least communicate better with people as to what can go into composting, where, how close should it be to your house, how do you do it in an individual home? And then I think the problem with people putting the wrong things in is that you get a list that says don't put these things in, and unless you put that right on your refrigerator or something and review it every once in a while, people will forget what can go and what can't.
Well, it's really food.
Yeah.
Food.
Yeah, but I mean,
sometimes the people, if it's like paper and paper towels, that other stuff really shouldn't. It should be food. It's the nutrients and energy for food. And the only issue is some foods are harder to break down. So bones and dairy and grease. But the idea of composting is that your pile gets to a high enough temperature that it actually can. I mean, they dispose of carcasses, mass, like during the bird flu. That's how they get rid of them, is through composting. So it can be, but what they say is a lot of people don't manage they're not professional composters, so their pile might not get to those temperatures. So if you're worried that it's not, then probably don't put the harder to digest food. But yeah, so we talk about all the solutions because it just depends on your community, your own personal household. But we like to have a range of things. So there's a lot of, the DP offers seminars about composting and how to do it and answers questions. I certainly, so that's an option for people who like it. But these community collection sites, we do think are important. And we're starting to try to test, should maybe your grocery store where you go to buy food be a nice place for you to drop off? Should, the farmer's market has made an excellent location. People are going to buy food. So it makes sense in their head that they might drop their food scraps there. So
make it simple, make it easier for people to do it.
Right. In some cases, it's the library, because that's where you might have gotten the education about how to do this. And so if they have a collection in Winslow, that's where we cited it. So we do work with communities to sort of figure out where would it make sense. And because of Maine's rural nature, we have some cities, but we have a lot. So we always have to talk about home composting as an option, because we're not going to be able to get community collection everywhere, but certainly the cities. So yes, all those points are yes. And we talked about because if we get elementary schools, they need to start it themselves at the school. But eventually it would be a nice place.
Has a place. School.
Yeah, it could be.
Community rates.
Yes, because people drop their kids off. And so we have talked about that as a good site, that schools might be an interesting drop-off site as well. So it's just, you know, it's a matter of trying to get first people to understand that there's a problem. And so I guess you guys are all really ahead of this. You're not questioning why to take action, but there definitely are reasons. Our faith tells us, the climate change tells us, and we actually have a state goal here in the state of Maine to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030. And the solutions are available now. They're not, you know, we're not waiting for some space age technology, or we don't have to go to Mars or something like that to figure it out. So like I told you at the beginning, we have 6 solution areas that we work on to end food waste. Now, you know, to reach profitability goals, people, social goals, the planet. And like I said, I've added today now this moral goal that, you know, it's really the right thing to do for those people of faith that your faith tells you also. Just to let you know, again, because our work that we do is very collaborative in nature, we don't do anything by ourselves. None of the work I'm talking about today is just the university. It's the university and the DEP, the university and climate action. So this issue of making it more important, it's actually, they're now considering recommending it for this climate action plan update, that food waste and some food waste mandates would be part of climate, not just heat pumps, not just electric vehicles, but also better management of food. So anyway, these are some of the partners that we work with. The hierarchy is important to understand, because when we did the home food waste challenge, which we tried the January before last to get every householder involved online and try to track their own food in their house for, well, we said 4 weeks. I'm thinking now maybe we should just do a week in the future. But anyway, some people were like, I compost. Why do I need to do this challenge? Well, okay, but if you look at it, you know, composting, it's better than the landfill. But there, you know, if food is produced to be eaten, then it would be better to feed people, then it would be better to feed animals, and then feed the soil if you can't do the other two. And the best thing of all, of course, is to reduce the amount of food that's produced so you don't have this surplus, you know, that in the first place, because that's the way to save the most money, right? Like, don't even spend it in the first place, and then you don't have to worry about how to give it away or do something else. So the hierarchy is super important, you know, and just if you remember the 3, reduce first. Okay, if you missed reducing and you have too much, then recover it and try to get it to be used for something. And then if you didn't get it to recover in time, then at least you should recycle. So those are the 3 things to kind of keep in mind. You know, this, I've kind of touched on them and we should keep going, but these are the 6 solutions, like track. But the good thing about this is to think of it even in your own home. These are the things that practices that you could think about. Tracking and measuring, because nothing ever is good without having the data first, right? Like, you need to know, like, if you tracked for a week and you saw that the biggest thing you keep throwing out in your food throwaway, and you don't even have to do anything fancy, and it can maybe end up in the trash at the end, but it's a good educational study to have a separate bag for that week, or even a few days, of just your food. Keep it separate, don't throw it in the trash. What is going in here and how much is going in here? If you see an overwhelming amount of bread, it's a pretty good clue that you're buying too much bread, or, you know, you're not storing the bread properly or something, but that is your problem, and your specific household needs to focus on bread. Or if it's the strawberries and you got box after box, okay, something is wrong. You're buying too much, you're not storing them right, but don't keep doing it. Like, figure it out. And so that's what we tell businesses. That's what we tell the state. That's why we did the food waste study, because first we need to have the data on what's happening. Second, food rescue, because again, that's the hierarchy. Get it to feed people. So getting it to the pantries, getting it to congregate, getting it to anybody, you know, community suppers, community meals, community fridges, anything that helps to keep that food viable so that people can eat it, instead of getting it to the next level, which is, okay, animals. So find yourself a friendly pig farmer or something. If you miss that, then, you know, get it to a composting facility. Education, it shouldn't be number 3. It probably should be 1, but we did this a long time ago. So education, you know, you get educated, share this education with your friends, family, neighbors. Solution 4 is interesting for those of you who are interested in economic development. There's a tremendous opportunity because in food systems, when food gets produced, there's a lot of byproducts. So we make beer here and there's spent grains. There's always going to be spent grains. As long as we're making beer, there's going to be grains that are left over. But there's a big economic opportunity to use those grains, which are still nutritious. And whether you make something for humans like bread or crackers or things, or you make something for animals, which might be livestock feed, there are good uses, and it makes an opportunity for a company to get developed, a person to start up these businesses. So they call it upcycled food. So it's using food, and in Iceland, they have a fantastic thing around their seafood industry, like no part of the fish goes to waste. They have like an entire building full of little independent businesses that all use the parts that come from the seafood and make sure that everything, because, it's an island community, so they don't want any waste. So 5 is just to get more people to donate. It seems like an extra step, but again, it's with very little effort, you are helping to feed more people. With very little effort, you're putting your food to better use. And solution 6 is really that getting it out of the landfill. So compost, community collection sites for composting. So just to tell you about some of the things we've done, we worked on a tracking and measuring study with the Department of Corrections. It was the beginning of the pandemic when our team was working. We couldn't get to a restaurant or a hotel because all those were not feeding people. But the correctional facilities were still feeding people. So we went in there and we did a tracking and measuring, 2 months of studying, and we're able to do a lot of interesting, find opportunities to save money. But we also really helped them with some structural issues of like why, just like I said in the household, why did that food keep ending up there? And it was some things about, in one case, they were making hamburgers and they were buying the cheapest price for hamburger meat that they could get. But in the end, those hamburgers were really not very good. And so they were ending up in the trash, a lot of hamburgers on hamburger day. They realized like, okay, we're paying for it in waste. Maybe we pay a little bit more for the beef, but it ends up being eaten instead of being thrown away. That would probably, raise our nutritional component for our, the residents. So anyway, that's, whether it's in your household or whether it's we're working with Northern Light Health now on the hospital study. We did this home tracking. We did a food waste challenge. Also very interesting. All the people who participated ended up reducing over 4 weeks, reduce their food waste about 18 to 25%. So it was really effective. And we're looking to continue this. I think though, 4 weeks they were really dedicated. They tracked their food waste every day and they submitted the data online for 4 weeks, but it's a lot to ask people to do. So we think maybe we can get more people to participate by doing does that seem reasonable? Like a week of tracking, maybe more. And plus, because it gives you the variation between the days.
Vary a lot from the week though.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so 4 weeks was great, but it just seems like hard. We mostly had people who were over 50 who's identified as retired because, and they would say, oh, my daughter-in-law or my kids should really do this, but they're running around so much, they would never have time to keep up with this for 4 weeks. So.
Do some commercial establishments like restaurants or someplace like Maine Medical Center, which is huge here. Mm-hmm. Do they? I'm sure they have an electric catered. The food goes through. Does it go into some? You filter it into some vessels, so the water goes through, and then all.
So it's the same. It's the same thing you're talking about. It's a garbage disposal.
That they've been composting for 7 or 8 years.
Their stuff goes
to something like that.
Yeah, I was
the major driver was to decrease their amount of solid waste because they weren't paying a tonnage fee.
Oh yeah,
solid waste.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
So they're economic.
Yes, Hannaford doesn't throw away any food. They give it all to AgriCycle, and that I always give them as a success story, not because they're not doing it because they have environmental aspirations to be the most green food retailer. Literally, the finance people have approved this because it's much more cost effective for them to manage their food waste that way.
Some hotels I've noticed they're doing a huge bread of stuff. If somebody touches a peach or something, they can't do anything with it supposedly.
Yeah, well, we have learned it through our school food waste study. Which is, let me just skip ahead to the. food rescue and donation. I mean, I think everybody understands this, that like you waste less food if you donate and rescue. And we have students who've done this kind of pilot work where they take the food from the cafeteria and actually drop it off at, the food pantry and things like that. So people sometimes are worried about prepared foods, but you just have to establish the relationship with the right facility that's happy to get that prepared food and can actually package it up and, get it out to people. So it's just a matter of finding the right place for you to donate your food. And, we right now have a food community, we call it Black Bear Community Fridge in our student union in Orono. For that purpose, the food from the cafeteria, we have student volunteers, they package it up and they put it in the fridge, and students can't believe like that they can go and get free food at any time of day or night from this community fridge. I mean, the students love this thing. And what's nice about it is it's not stigmatizing at all. Like, we don't care, nobody's asking you, how hungry are you? Are you hungry enough to take this? We're saying this food is going to go to waste. Please go to the refrigerator. And if you can use it, please take it. So it's the opposite. You are helping us by taking the food out of here because otherwise it would be wasted. We do this community education. Heartland was one of our first pilots that we did here. We created the signage, which you've probably seen at your drop-off sites. And then I'm skipping ahead to get to, we create a lot of materials. We have a school food program because we're really proud of this, because we have identified that by working with kindergarten, with elementary schools, we get the most impact. When we talk about marketing, there's no better salesperson for something than your 5 or 6 year old to like 8-year-old. When they come home and they have a new idea about something that should be done in the household, they are very effective. And also, though, unfortunately, it's those households with younger kids where most of the food is wasted. So, and consequently, the schools also. So we really have we've seen a major win in reducing the amount of food that's wasted in the cafeteria. And the two things are education and those share baskets where, the students, they took something, they didn't really want to eat it, an apple and things. And according to actually the CDC, which was new for a lot of kitchen managers, the rules around those share baskets is as long as if it's a whole fruit, you can wash it and then reuse it. So it can come back. And they were thinking that it would have to be thrown away. But definitely other kids can take it. And but not everybody, even whatever the rules are, still didn't. We had kitchen managers who were not that happy to see, they're like, well, I don't want to take that. I don't even want to see other kids take that food out of the basket. Well, except what happened is when we put it as part of this test, in one particular case, this kitchen manager heard a little second grade girl, came up to her and said, is it okay if I take home some of this food for after school? Because we don't have any food at my house after school. And so she had to say yes. And then she said, and can I take some for my sister too? Because she doesn't have anything to eat after school either. So, when you are face to face with how it's really working for these kids, and I talked to another middle school the other day, and they said many of their students are the primary source for food in those households. So they try to do as much as they can to redirect any surplus from the school meals that can be, packaged up for those kids to take home after school. So there are just so many benefits, the educational, this is our future of our state, these kids that are in elementary school today. And if we could start them out by thinking about, first of all, take what you eat and eat what you take. Food is for your body, not for the landfill, and share with others. I mean, again, what will our communities be like to have these kids grow up with these as their basic ideas for how to operate? So it's been great. And we're grateful to the World Wildlife Fund that they're going to fund another year. So we have 4 new schools lined up. And also, we should also feel good about our state, because based on the results of this food waste work, we went to Governor Mills, and for the 2nd year in a row, and you guys are sort of, my perfect example, this is the Maine Food Waste Awareness Week. So this last week in September 23rd to September 29th, for this year, Governor Mills issued a proclamation making this the official Maine Food Waste Awareness Week. So you guys are all part of that, getting aware, and please do what you can during this week to share with others. So that's the school. This is that processing. We worked with farmers to try to see what their surplus would be and how we could use it. We have a map that we're working on, a GIS map that can help connect a food system. So where are the farmers? Where are the processors? Where are the retailers? Where are the pantries? Then where are the composters? So that as a community, you could sort of map out your own circular food system and make sure that things wouldn't go to waste and wherever you are in the system. We have a toolkit that sort of, if you know of a restaurant or somebody that you think could be donating, even yourself, but for businesses, it shows how they can take a tax, get a tax credit for the retail value of the food that they donate. So it really, I mean, they might say, well, it takes time to have an employee box it all up. Well, but I mean, if you can deduct or get a credit for the retail value of that food, that might make you think differently. Here's some of the community food recycling in Portland. And so really the next steps out of today, to maybe integrate, here's one way to put your faith into practice, by taking better care of the food, taking care of the earth, feeding others, share the food waste education. So I have a link to our website where we have a lot of this. I brought some tip sheets for you today, some resources if you want to read more. You can go home and you can track and measure your own food waste, which was what we say is the place to start. Okay.
I just have a fast question about those little green composting bags they sell. Do they really work? Are they composted in a couple of weeks?
No, so the question about composting was good. Only food, not compostable anything. And what's really horrifying is people in places where they pay more for compostable bags or compostable ware and all this compostable stuff, which it's not compostable. And so as a practice, I mean, some of it might be, but the composters don't take it because it might not, because what happens, we have an engineer on our materials management task force, and she explained that those compostable things are, so if you take corn or something, and so it's, fine, it's edible, but then you process it into like a fork or something. How you process it, either the high heat that you use for the processing changes the chemical structure of what seemed like it was just corn. Now you can't break it down, except with some specific, they don't tell you, like industrial process that doesn't really exist. So that, or there are microplastics. What binds that corn together to make it a fork or a bag or something is microplastic. So in either case, and again, the composters know this, they don't want compostable stuff. And we had one company we were working with that felt very good in their cafeteria that they had bought all this compostable ware. Even our schools, it was killing us that the schools during the pandemic were paying extra to buy compostable servingware, and it's not compostable, and they were paying more. But so it's this education of like what really is the right thing to do. We know, you could call, you could write to us anytime if you have a question, and we try to get out and we try to get the information out as much as possible, but people still don't. And marketing,
shouldn't be labeled compostable, should be against the law, do you think?
Well, there's a lot of things that are wrong information. Yeah, I know, it's like the food day labeling. The food day labeling. Food day labeling also is misleading, and it's on every package. So yes, but there's things that are not helping us in this work. And so, yes.
On the food day labeling thing, I buy a lot of really good prepared, all kinds of different salads. My partner was doing this, I had to fix my thing. I buy that and wasting all that stuff. And, but there'll be a date, usually when I go buy the salads, the date is 5 days or so from the day of buying it. But those things are 5 days after that date.
Yes, yeah, I mean, they're just trying to be safe.
Refrigerated and.
Yes. So you just, again, that's why I told you in the UK where they've been most successful in reducing is because they reminded people just taste it yourself, smell it yourself, and see. So
like you would before the day anybody ever went to anything like that.
Yes. Well, I had, I think the last thing was to also try to build food waste action. And I was saying that I have the 2 handouts. So that's why I wanted to that last part. There's a tips in your household, things like never go shopping without a shopping list. That always leads to you being subject to some marketing, fresh, whatever. But if you didn't have it on your list, you probably don't have a plan for using it. So probably stick to your list. The other thing is this is my favorite one, shop your fridge and pantry first. I mean, it's my favorite because it's like my big weakness is that I'll be thinking like, oh, I don't think I have any more of that. And then I'll go buy another one only to bring it home and find out I already had it. Now I have way more than I need. But, you know, at that point, I should get it to a neighbor. I should get it to somebody else because I'm not going to eat twice as much of what I planned. So definitely shop your fridge first. First of all, it's so rewarding to see that you're such a good shopper that you already had it at home, you know, but definitely to think of how it saved you money on that shopping trip. Like if you don't have to go buy that extra thing of flour because you already had one, you know, that could be $5 or $6, you know, that you save off your shopping trip. And certainly fruits and vegetables are really an expensive part. So some of these things, and there are just so many good, there's a resource I give on the tip sheet for a website that you can put any weird things that you have left over in your refrigerator, you know, like whatever, it's, you know, some kind of sauce, you know, some celery and olives and like cheese. And you put those ingredients in there and it will give you a whole selection of recipes that you can make with these odd combination of things that you have left in your refrigerator. I mean, that is a good use of the internet. Yes.
In response to that, if anyone needs allspice, I have like.
Yes, yes.
On a positive note, I do volunteer for a group called Hope Squad, and we serve the homeless and the street people. At Preble Street, every week we go to Preble Street, the resource center, and the amount of food that is donated is amazing. And I mean, that's wonderful. We can go in there and take things and we feed people, probably about 100, 150 people a week on the street with what's donated. So it's wonderful. There is something like that available. And I know they take boxes to people too.
Right.
Preble Street does.
Well, that's that circular food system. So it doesn't have to be a bleak story. It's just sort of bleak the way that we're not connecting the parts. But when the food and wayside food programs, you'll find the same thing. I mean, that, you know, they are masters of like figuring out who has surplus. I mean, one of the biggest food distributors is Cisco, right? You see their trucks all the time. They service every hotel and restaurant. Well, Cisco has a lot of food surplus. I mean, somebody canceled an order, they didn't want it, this didn't look good, the sweet potatoes are too small, whatever it is. So they have truckloads of food that would not be otherwise used, and it finds its way, you know, to wayside food programs. And then they serve, you know, they serve as a stop for multiple pantries throughout the area. So
We have an excellent food pantry here.
yeah.
And a lot of the companies you show there donate through various systems. And then it's delivered to our door every week. And we feed close to 100 families every week with a lot of very nice fruits and vegetables, as well as all the canned goods. So, you know, if you want to donate anything to that.
Well, that's what's nice. It's a good point.
Morning, so.
It's a good point. There are systems that exist, and that when you know of something, because this happened up in, we did some work in Machias, and we did these community suppers, which were a really good way to use surplus that might not last through the pantry system. It might not have enough time to get out, but it had enough time to be cooked, and or if you had partial amounts of things. So they had a community supper. But one of the interesting things, besides using up surplus and feeding people, was that it created this conversation about food waste in the community or food surplus. And so people who were eating at the supper were talking, and they're like, oh yeah, come to think of it, I volunteer at this VA hospital. Oh, we actually have a thing where our freezers aren't really big enough. And so sometimes we get an order and we have to get rid of the stuff that's already in there. How would you guys, you know, could that be used in the community? So, you know, it's really this thing of like talking about it gets people to realize, oh, I saw, you know, and we heard a lot during these vast storm seasons where the grocery stores, when the power shuts down, people who are attuned to this wasted food issue saw like them throwing all the meats, and like every single freezer and refrigerated cooler had to be dumped. And so now as a state, as a, you know, our Food Rescue Maine team, we are talking with the grocery stores about, you know, and even the grocery stores management leadership was getting calls during this last, because people were like, you're not really throwing that stuff out, are you? And so, I mean, and they do have agricycle, so it's being made into biogas, but still, it was really prime, wonderful food that could have been for eating. And so we are working on trying to figure out how can that not happen. Yep.
Is that the FDA regulations that say you have to throw this out after the power's been out for so many hours? Is that?
Well, I think that they have protocols, but the question is, because we saw retailers handle it differently. Do you wait until the very last minute before it's no longer edible? Or do you actually decide that our policy is to call it 2 hours into it, where we still have 2 hours to get it to somebody else's facility and it can be carted away? So that's what we're really working on. It's certain retailers said, and we discuss this, they know when their power is going to come on. CMP, we were having big discussions if you're a retailer about when is this power, and they know that for whatever reason, it's not going to be on until tomorrow. So for sure, this is not going to, you're not magically going to restart these coolers. So now is when you should be contacting your, feeding resource to get it out of there. But, it's the bigger the entity, the more, I don't want to say bureaucracy, operational processes you have. So there's a handbook on what do you do in the event of this, and the handbook says you do this, this, and this, and so the people will do that. So until we get those procedures to change, it's not the person, the store manager can only do what they're being told to do, but we think there's a better way. And one of the things that on this climate action, where we're making recommendations, we learned about what I think is the most horrific practice of people being in their jobs, being mandated to throw away good and edible food for no reason other than it might not look as good. So, somebody was talking about a fast food chain in which they produce burgers, and that these workers who are barely able to put food on their own tables at the wages that they're paid are being told after an hour, you have to take all these burgers and throw them into the trash because we only can have them for that hour. And so this woman was telling me that her nephew on the way to the trash was like trying to eat as many of these burgers as they could because like they were hungry. And if they were going to throw them away, certainly they would eat them. And, I've had these discussions where I've seen food service workers just throwing perfectly good. And they're like, well, yeah, we're not supposed to keep it in that warming thing. It doesn't look as good. They decided. And I said, well, why don't you take it to the break room? And they said, oh, we used to do that, but we're not allowed to do that anymore.
I've run across that in a lot of places.
Yes, and so I said, look, you got it. This is just, who could argue on the other side of this one? We need to put legislation that says you cannot force a worker to take perfectly good edible food and throw it away for no reason. I mean, those freezers, those cooler things, that's a real reason. Now, of course, you could change the timing, but we're just talking about it doesn't look as good. People might not like it. I mean, that food could be used in the break room perfectly fine. And, they just have this. So anyway, so that we're talking about, it's not through, but that was one of the recommendations, that should not exist in our state where we have such hunger, high levels of hunger, that people should not be asked to throw away food that they know they could be eating.
A lot of these big supermarkets have backup generators.
Well, that's an interesting question. We asked that, and there will not be any future. Now, maybe some new technology, but existing generators with the electricity needs would be too great, the power needs. So they couldn't. Because we said, well, are your stores eventually going to get generators for these storm events?
Big expensive.
Yeah, they said it wouldn't. So that's not going to happen. But they said the university has some new technology that might, in the future, some future date, make it affordable.
Let me just stop us now. Yeah, I think we could keep you all day from the questions.
I really appreciate it.
And one of the things I would say, it occurs to me that, and certainly for our public policy group, I will bring back to that committee what is it that we ought to be doing here at St. Luke's? And with Janine and Meredith, maybe the same thing in your parishes. Where should we be trying to volunteer? Should we come back and pick your brain on how might I go? And my sense is, I haven't asked you, but my hunch is that you'd be willing to talk with us if we needed direction to get connected various places, because you're a wealth of information. We have maybe some time and energy that could be devoted to continuing this. So this won't be the last of the conversation. I just want to mention that hiding here are the pages that Susanne has mentioned.
Here we go.
these are the two, and then Jamie was kind enough to Xerox some more for us, double-sided, so.
One is like home tips. So this is the stuff you could do. This is the home tips. And then this one says for more information. So this kind of, if I didn't tell you enough today, or if I told you just enough to get you excited, you can go and find out, do more reading at home.
So pick one up to the extent you'd like it, and let me just join me in thanking Susan. It was a pleasure having you.
It was great presenting to your group. It was, probably the most engaged, conversation. So thank you.
And for those of you who have any room in your stomachs or
yeah, don't let things go to waste. Bring it home.
yes, there's a lot of food over here that we don't want to
And if you are not on the Public Policy and Environmental Action Team mailing list, email list, and you'd like to be, there's a sign-up sheet right over there on the hush by those flowers.
That's one of the feature. This is the double-sided.
Double-sided. Oh, good idea. Yeah, you get everything. That's a better idea.
I didn't hear I'm sorry, we were late. What is?
Oh, I'm Susanne Lee, and I'm a faculty fellow at the Mitchell Center at University.
That one's double-sided. This is the same thing, but single-sided.
Yeah.
I'm going. So you missed.
Yes. Yeah.
You didn't get the whole. I mean,
Why I just. I didn't.
I know. That's what I said.
Anyway, but no, we made it here. But yeah,
This is the same both sides. These are, so just double check. These are one-sided, but this is the same thing.
Same thing, but
Yeah, they're.
so you're not looking at my face.
yes. So I just want to make sure.
I said, Sarah, we've got to do.
Well, I'd love to, that's my job is to, so I open up education and talk.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
We need to maybe start doing something at a higher.
I mean, we
level.
do things like.
Thanks for coming.
And for us,
They,
we
but
have
see,
so
the
many
children,
things going on.
there's so much now.
Now,
We could never have this talk. 'Cause it
our
feels
stuff
like-
doesn't really get read.
No, I.
Yeah, so that's good.
Anyway.
I think this probably didn't work.
Yeah.
Well, and I understand that. but
No, I'm happy
I
to
mean,
help it anyway. That's why we have those 6 solutions, 2 pilots. On
Nope.
all the different, so we do food waste tracking, we do food
Right,
donation,
stop.
we do food recovery, we do
Yeah.
education,